Hi, I'm Gail Bannock.
And I'm Ilana Santone. Welcome to the She Means Business podcast. Throughout our careers, we faced countless questions and sought advice from other women we respect and admire. And that's exactly what this show is about.
Each week, we aim to help you achieve your goals by sharing our experiences and talking with successful leaders, offering real stories, practical advice, and actionable takeaways for women who mean business. All right, let's do this.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the She Means Business podcast. Today, we're here with Lisa Gibson, founder of Ignite Communications. Lisa has had an impressive career across a number of major brands, including Canadian Tire, Target, and most recently, Microsoft. In most of those experiences, she has been a communications lead, but she was also the chief of staff to the president of Microsoft Canada. Now, most recently, she's gone out on her own, building a more personalized communications boutique firm. Gail and I have had the pleasure of working with Lisa over a number of occasions, including at Canadian Tire and Target. And one of Lisa's passions has always been about personal branding. So we're thrilled to have Lisa on the show. Lisa, welcome. We'd love to ask you your first question. Just tell us a little bit about your career and what led you to starting your own business.
Thanks. It's great to be here today. Yeah, so I started in the industry about 30 years ago. And when I started at Canadian Tire, and I started in a temp position. I had just returned back from England, and truthfully, I needed a job. I went through a temp agency, and they placed me in an admin role in the corporate affairs department at Canadian Tire. And I got to say, I knew within a few weeks that that was not the role for me. But I also knew it was a fantastic company. And my boss at the time, it was just great. And he said to me, before you make a move, I get this isn't for you, but before you make a move, let's get together and talk about maybe what role could be suitable for you. Like, what would you be interested in? And what he had me do actually is put together a bit of a business case for a role that didn't currently exist. And so that's what I did. Long story short, I ended up getting the role, and it ended up morphing into a PR role. And I'll tell you, they actually funded me to go back to school in the evening, which was my decision. But they asked me, would you want to develop more public relations skills? And I was all over it. I always think you should take opportunities to obtain new skills. And so they paid for me to go back to school, and I ended up doing my certificate in PR. I spent 16 years at Canadian Tire. I kind of moved up through different roles. My last role was associate vice president when I left. Yeah, just a phenomenal ride. And from there, I actually took a bit of a gamble, and I took a maternity leave for a year at Shoppers Drug Mart, another fantastic role. And I got to tell you that it was a gamble because it was 12 months and I had just bought a new house. But there was something telling me to, take the risk. And I really wanted to get experience working at Shoppers Drug Mart. So I took the role. And while I was there, I got headhunted for what then was my dream job at Target.
Yeah, it wasn't at all for all of us.
For quite a while anyway. Yeah, but honestly, it was fantastic. So I ended up moving over to Target. And as you know, Gail, I spent, I think it was close to 3 years. I was actually employee number 2 in Canada, and just a phenomenal experience getting to build from scratch the team and be part of a more global organization and just learn a lot about building a business really from the ground up in a new market. So that was fantastic. I was there, as I said, close to 3 years, I guess. And just before they kind of turned the lights off on Target in Canada, I ended up moving over to Tangerine. And I was at Tangerine Bank for a year. Again, it was kind of one of those situations where I took the job at Tangerine for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is I thought it would kind of give me a bit of better balance. As you can remember, we were all really kind of going a little crazy at Target. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to take this role. It's a different industry, for one. And two, it felt like it had a bit more balance. And truthfully, when I got there, I realized that I actually really like being incredibly busy. I know it sounds odd. And I just felt like I like finance, but it wasn't enough necessarily. And so I got headhunted for a role at Microsoft. That was such a big turning point in my career because, one, it was a whole different industry. I was incredibly nervous when I had my interview with the president at the time because, honestly, I had no propensity for technology. And I kept thinking to myself, I do not understand why they were come calling to me, right? Like, I have no background in tech. And actually, I even said that to her in the interview because I said, listen, I've got a wealth of comms experience, but I really want to let you know that tech hasn't been something I've been deeply invested in. And the other thing with this position is it was actually a new role. So it wasn't just a comms role. It was actually a chief of staff, business manager type role. And truthfully, I had never had exposure to that kind of role. So I didn't really know what the role was fully about. And again, it was another one of those situations where I just trusted my gut. It felt like the right move. I took a bit of a risk because I was going into a new area. I was joining a leadership team made up of a whole bunch of sellers and people that are brilliant in technology. And so it was a little bit intimidating, I'm not going to lie. But I loved it. And I spent 8 years there. And it was just a phenomenal 8 years. It's a fantastic company. And then after about 8 years, they decided to make some changes to the role. And they were going to split the role up into two and change a little bit of the requirements for what the chief of staff was going to do and the head of comms. And so I took a global role. As a result, I decided to move into the global world and took a Microsoft global role, again, doing PR, and was there just a few months and realized perhaps it was time for me to do what I'd always wanted to do, which is start my own business. Again, very scary decision. And I was really kind of, at the time, I was thinking, is this the right time? Is it the right move? But again, listen to my gut. Something was telling me it was. And so, just shortly thereafter, I started Ignite Communications. And so it's been about a year now. And again, oddly enough, I'm working with some of the former companies that I used to work for and just loving it.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I did some research. I was curious. I was curious about this personal branding, probably back when I did the exercise myself, but also just more recently on what is it about personal brand? Because I've heard it's getting more and more important. It's always been important, but more important to really know yourself. And I found this LinkedIn survey that said hiring managers, 70% of them said a personal brand was actually more important than a good resume. And I'm wondering from your experience, why do you think that is? Like, why is personal branding so important?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research that says, obviously, people are spending a lot more time online, and particularly after the pandemic. LinkedIn, for example, has kind of turned from, the place you go when you want another job or when you want to hire someone to actually a platform for full thought leadership. So I think the platform has switched from just being about retention and talent, attraction to actually, influencing people's journeys. And so I think it's more important than ever. Having said that, I've seen leaders try to be all things to all people. And so part of the process and part of the being strategic and being successful and is really honing in on not just knowing yourself, but picking like the 3 to 4 things that you want to be known for.
When you say things you want to be known for, like what kinds of things? Like what's an example of something?
Yeah, so for me, for example, I really am pretty passionate about how communicators and marketers can leverage AI. So that might be one of my brand pillars. Another one, when I was working at Microsoft, and still is, it might have been, how to empower women in STEM. There might be another one that's, I don't know, you might want to be known as a compassionate leader. You might want to be known as a compassionate coach. But it's picking like the 3 to 4 things and then really, really focusing your strategy.
I feel as though, we all have a brand, whether we know it or not. And it's funny, I'm always surprised when I talk to people and they kind of describe me to me. I'm always amazed at, first of all, how well they know me. And it's always fun to have people play back who they think you are and match that with who you think you are and who you want to be. Everyone's brand is out there. This idea of a personal brand, I think, is really, it's not that you don't have one and you should go get one. You've got one. It's just the question of whether you know what it is and whether you like it and whether you want to change what it is. And so I really like what you're saying around, what are your pillars, because then that helps you understand. And then you can kind of, I'm assuming, do kind of a self-assessment of what your personal brand is. So how do you recommend somebody become, first of all, aware of how they're projecting themselves and what their personal brand is?
There's two ways. The one you absolutely just said, which is you ask your friends and family. So it's pretty simple. You send them a note and say, what are the top things that you think of when you think of me? What do you think my top strengths are? I also like to tell them why I'm doing it, so it doesn't look like I'm looking for an ego boost. But when I switched over to start my company, that's one of the things I did. I sent a bunch of friends and family and said, hey, I'm just curious, what do you think my top strengths are? What do you think? And then to your point, Gail, you look at it and say, does this line up? Do I feel good about what people are saying? I did a quick Google search and see what's out there, right? See what is out there about you and what pops up first. Does it resonate? And there's a really good exercise that I like to do in terms of just, figuring out your brand pillars. It's what we call like a timeline exercise. And so you map out all of your personal and professional milestones, whatever those are. You write them all out. And then you look at the ones that make you feel like the most proud, where you've had unique experiences or skills where it really lines up to your values, and then you circle them, and then you build out a chart, and you actually write some of these down, and then you look at the things like, okay, so then what are my unique skills and experiences? Because one thing that I hear from a lot of people is, I might be a marketing expert, but there's a million of us out there. Well, there's only one that's you, right? So like, it's about finding like how you stand out, how you're differentiated. So by writing out like your skills, your experiences, the stories that are unique to those things, you know, what are the things you actually really like to do? Because that's the other thing is you got to make sure it's something you're passionate about. Like if you're good at it, but you don't like it and you don't have a strong opinion on it.
No, and I think that's huge. I think that's really huge because as I'm thinking about myself, you know, I spent a lot of my career in insights, and I didn't want to be in insights. And so, you know, calling out that all of those wins, it wasn't necessarily going to get me to where I wanted to get to. So I think it speaks to the second point of, okay, so you've figured out kind of what you've done and where you are. And then now it's, okay, is that where I actually want to be and where I want to go and where I want my personal brand to go?
That is actually a really fantastic point, because it is also where you want it to go. For sure, right? And then, because then you can start looking at like, what do I need to do to kind of get me over here if I'm not already there? So if your self-assessment and your search comes back and you're like, well, I want to be here, but it's still saying I'm here, then you got to think about what you need to do to get there. And so typically we say like 3 to 4 brand pillars. And then from there, it's kind of about building like your narrative and figuring out what vehicles you want to leverage, right? So everybody automatically thinks of social media, which is like an obvious one. But then there's other ways, right? There's through speaking opportunities, doing things like this, doing a keynote, a fireside chat. Like Ilana, I've seen you do a whack of fireside chats lately. Gail, I've seen you on podcasts. So there's different ways, right, that you can then, there's doing media interviews, there's writing articles, being a guest writer, joining your industry association. Lots of ways you can raise your brand there, joining a board.
What if you're junior and you're kind of starting out, you're mid-level management, and you either don't have as much access to that, or, you know, I think it's challenging when you're early in your career on both ends. It's hard to be able to assess your brand because there's just not that much out there. If you Google yourself when you're 29, there's probably not as much out there. And then on the flip side, ways to change that. So what advice would you give for kind of younger people who are trying to craft their brand?
I mean, I actually think everybody does have things out there. You just have to think about it a bit differently. So everybody automatically goes to their career and where they're at. But like a lot of us have like coached, have volunteered in the past, have been a lifeguard, have done whatever the other things that we've done, even before we started our career. And so it's looking at all those things, right? It's not just thinking that you have to be a VP or at a certain level, because your unique experiences in whatever those are will matter to someone. It goes back to a little bit of having a bit of imposter syndrome. People kind of think, well, I don't have anything unique to say because I'm not further along in my career. Well, that's not true. You've had tons of experiences to get where you are. If you were a member of your student board, or like, there's just lots of different ways that you get different experiences. And that's why I like the timeline milestone, because it starts, like, it doesn't just start the day you started your career. It goes, you should start further back and look at all the things. I would also say, you know, I was asked to join a board when I was fairly, I would say kind of like early-ish in career. It was a not-for-profit board. And I mean, I literally thought, what the hell are they asking me to be on this board for? Like, what experience do I have? But I'll tell you, like, I was the youngest person on the board. But then I was also kind of more in tune with a lot of the social media things. Obviously, my background's in PR. Like, I had a bit of a different skill set than the rest of the people on the board. So I wouldn't count out those experiences. I think you have to just get over feeling like that you have nothing to add. Because I think everyone has a story and everyone has learned something along the way that they can share.
It strikes me just listening to you speak, Lisa, that there's kind of like the what and then the how, right? Like what is work that you almost have to do to be able to articulate who you are and what you stand for, what your key pillars are. And I think what Gail said and what you reinforced was that from two of not necessarily the same path, but where do you want to be X number of years from now? And then using that who you are, because who you are doesn't really innately change. It's really how you use that to kind of get to where you want to be. But the how is really interesting, because I think what you're saying is it's once you know yourself or know your personal brand, there's an element of then what are the things at your disposal to be able to kind of get it out there in a way that's unique or comfortable for you. So it's not all about like everyone has to be on social.
Right.
Because if you're not comfortable being on social, I don't know what your perspective would be, but feels like if you're not comfortable on social, then you're not being really true to you. So you have to either work at that as a lever, or you have to say, okay, what other levers are at my disposal to be able to communicate my brand? What do you think about that?
I think you have to take a step back, first of all, and get really clear on why. Like, why do you want to build your personal brand? So, for example, if your reason for wanting to build it is to advance your career, to either get a new job, get a new position, get on a board, then I think you do need to be on social, particularly LinkedIn. It really, to me, just kind of depends on your goal and who you're trying to reach. If you're trying to get an internal promotion, then maybe it's more about being active in your town halls. I mean, I still think LinkedIn is important for internal, but I think, no. So I think it's being really clear about what's your objective. Like, what is it that you want to achieve with your personal brand as a starting point?
I think you just brought up a really interesting point just around sometimes you work for a company, especially if you've been there a while, and or if you're a very public figure for that company, and you become very connected to the company, and it's a bit of a blurry line between you. And I've that's happened for me, because when I work somewhere, I'm an ambassador, and I talk about the brand and what I've done, and so how do you then pull apart what is you promoting your personal brand versus you promoting the business that you're in or the product that you're selling? How do you make sure that you don't leave that company and therefore you're now brandless because you dedicated all of this time and energy towards promoting the brand that you were working for?
So for me, it's about like thought leadership, right? So if we go back to my example of AI, obviously I learned about AI at Microsoft. And so while a lot of my posts are about some of the products and services at the time that Microsoft offered, I would also say I'd have an opinion generally on how communicators can use AI. And so I would say yes, on the one hand, you're posting about your company, perhaps, but don't make it about all of that, right? You probably have a unique perspective on something.
So it sounds like there's a lot of steps that get you to almost like a set of bullet points or kind of a narrative, as you say, but it's a lot of work in the background to get you to this output, which is a really concise set of bullet points on who each of us is, that kind of pulls in who you are at the core. I think that's what you're talking about with your values, who you are at your core, where you want to be, and also kind of the key things you want people to know to get you to the goals that you have. And that's your output of the personal brand, is that exercise?
Yeah, it totally is. And the only other thing I would add is, again, just it has to be things you're passionate about. So I do a lot of work with leaders and organizations. And, if I even look at some of the work I've done on exec comms with some of the leaders that are from the same organization, and literally I remember sitting in this meeting and someone goes, oh, well, I'm really passionate about women in tech, but someone's already doing that. So I'll do this thing. And it's like, okay, but are you passionate about it? Because, right? And also you may just have a different twist on it. It doesn't mean you can't have three people that are just with your unique perspective. So I do really think the passionate part, because it has to kind of come through.
What do you do if you send out a note to your friends and family and you ask them to tell you what their perception is of you, and then you get it back and it's not what you had in mind, or it's not what you want it to be?
Then I actually go back to someone who I trust a lot and say, can I just ask what made you think this? Because it literally could just be then that you either need to edit your narrative in your content, or you need to do more content, or you just, or the way that you're trying to show up external. That's the other thing, the way you show up to an external audience versus it has to all be the same.
I just had a thought too. And I don't know, because you talked a little bit at the beginning around LinkedIn kind of evolving from being the place you go to look for a job. And I do agree. I've seen that evolution in my own behavior on LinkedIn to reflect that. I remember, I definitely distinctly remember a time when if somebody starts being really active on LinkedIn, people start to notice and think that they are looking for a job. You basically, if you're happy in your job, this, perception, if you're happy in your job, then you don't go on LinkedIn as much or at all. And so how do you respond to people who are worried that if they start getting all active on LinkedIn, people at their work are going to think that they're looking for work?
So I hear you. I think that always was the case. I'm not convinced that it is now. Yeah.
It's changed.
And I do think too, if you're talking about your company, again, I don't think you should fully talk about your company, but if you're kind of talking about your company, I don't know. I don't know that you have anything to worry about. I guess it depends on kind of what kinds of things that you're posting. But yeah, I feel like that perception is not as prevalent as it used to be. Because I agree with you. It's sort of like when you start dressing up suddenly at work and being away.
Yeah. Start wearing a suit to an all jeans employer.
Yeah.
Lisa, do you have any tools or, books that you've used in your past to help you along the way, or any recommendations on places people can go to start their journey on this exercise?
I'm actually writing a book right now.
That's so
I'm kind of
amazing.
putting all this together in a book, because I think there's lots of places to look, but I haven't seen one that kind of does the step by step. I think there's some really good LinkedIn courses there that are more like thought leadership, because that's kind of what I'm focused on.
I love that. And I think it's also important to remember, if you think of your personal brand like a brand, it's a drop in the bucket for the long lasting, work. And so it's just one article or one post or one like that is, when you're building a brand, it is the systematic approach to a thought or to a position or whatever it is. It comes from the consistency. And so you need the little posts that do nothing, but they are another contribution towards what it is that you're trying to say.
And I also just look at it like it's a good opportunity to learn. So I try really hard not to get too down on myself, because there's a learning in it. Again, it could be the time of day. It could be the topic. It could be, did you have the right graphic? Like, it's all that kind of stuff pulled together, right? And the only way you get better is if you learn from it instead of beating yourself up.
I just want to build on one topic. So I'm kind of going through my career. I think my brand is pretty good, but I get hit with the, oh, that's interesting. My brand isn't what I thought it was, right? I have a talk with my manager. I have a talk with my manager once removed, or a new employer. I'm just curious, what is there such thing as rehabilitating your personal brand, or not even rehabilitating, but really it's almost like with intent, changing the perception of who you are and how you might approach that if where you are isn't where you want to be.
Yeah. I think it goes back to like your narrative and making sure your brand, like internal to your organization and external, is totally aligned. You can absolutely evolve your brand. I think it's looking at again, where do you want to be? And then what's the narrative that needs to shift? And then how do you build your content around that narrative to help shift it?
That notion of introspection and really being curious about who you are is actually one of the key components to what you're talking about. Because if you just think you show up and your personal brand is going to be what you want it to be, maybe in many cases, maybe that's the case, but it strikes me that what you're talking about is an intention, right? It's not only who you are, but the intention of who you want to be perceived as. And though in many cases, in all cases, they have to be aligned in terms of who you are being who you kind of show up at, but there's tweaks that you can make and or introspection you can do to kind of shape how you show up with those things that are true to you.
Well, I remember reading a quote from Jeff Bezos. It said something like, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. For sure, you can absolutely evolve your brand, like 100%. I just think you have to figure out what is it that you're saying and or doing or not saying and doing that is creating that image of you.
Right.
Yeah. I think that the more we talk about it, it's really just like a brand. It's just running a brand. And for, anybody in marketing or understands marketing, I think it's kind of much easier to grasp. But just like you would if you were managing a company with a brand, you do certain things, you check in with your customers, make sure that they think what you think what you want them to think. And then you pivot a little bit more and you have this ad or this, and you check in again. And so I think it's important to understand this is not a one and done. You don't just do this exercise, call it a day, and, do a couple of posts on LinkedIn and off you go. You're now a thought leader who is introspective and, wise. And so it's about consistency. You mentioned this earlier, Lisa, and I love it, of like, you have to live what you preach on LinkedIn. You can't have this alter ego on LinkedIn where you're this other person that you wish you could be and then show up at work as a completely different person. And it's really just an ongoing iterative process.
Well, and I imagine it helps with the construct of a team as well, because if you have a series of leaders or people on your team, individuals who know themselves really well or know what they like, where their real strengths are, where they have opportunities, the ability to get to harness the power of that team to drive to their full potential is probably better than a bunch of leaders who don't really, really know who they are or what they stand for, where they want to be.
So Lisa, we like to ask a lot of our guests, what advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know now?
Oh, that's a good one. I think for me, it would be ask for what you want. A lot of the times in my career, and I got lucky because people really supported me, but I didn't actually ask for or go after the things I wanted. I felt like, if I worked really hard, people would notice and then they would promote me. If I wanted a job, I would apply for it and then maybe I would get it. Versus, there's something about deliberately asking for something that you want and make it known. And the president of Microsoft, the person I used to first work for, said to me one time, your manager isn't a mind reader. You should really ask for what you want because not everybody on a team wants the same thing. And I thought that was such incredible advice. And I've listened to it ever since. And I wish I had known that when I was younger.
I love that. I think women more so are prone to that. And then also if they do ask, they're worried that they'll be seen as too pushy or too aggressive or whatever. So I love that.
Absolutely,
and
for sure. Yeah.
I think just like in any relationship too, like ask for what you want. And the worst that can happen is that you don't get it, but at least you know that they know what you want. So I love that. That's great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Couldn't agree more. For sure.
Yeah.
And it takes a level of courage. But you know what? I think to your point, at least at the end of the day, whether you get what you ask for or not, you put it out there.
I love that. Thank you. Lastly, before we sign off, tell us about your book that you have since written. What's it called and where can people find it?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So it's called Shine the Spotlight on You. It's a step-by-step guide to building and amplifying your personal brand. The public launch date will be January 7th, and it will be available on Amazon. Yeah, and I'm really excited. It's basically kind of taking all of the experience and insights that I learned working with leaders at all of these various organizations on helping them build their brand and kind of compiled it into what I hope is an easy-to-follow guide.
That's excellent. Well, we can't wait to read it. Thank you so much for sharing your story. This has been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much. I need to go and do these exercises myself. It's so important and just continue to do it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was great chatting to both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that was really quite a session of reflection for me. Yeah. And I know we did a lot of that because we were talking about kind of how it resonated with us as we went.
Yeah, I was having thoughts while we were talking to her.
And I think you made a really good point about your inflection point from insights into, where you wanted to go. And you like having watched you on that journey, it was really clear that you had done that. You had said like, I'm here, but I want to be there. And therefore I need to do these things in order to get there. And I don't know if it was that disciplined for you or not.
It's interesting because not only was I very much at the time, I was like, okay, insights is behind me. I am not insights. And I almost rejected it. I was like, I'm not insights at all. And don't even talk to me about it. That is not part of who I am. I kind of was, I don't want to say like embarrassed or ashamed. I just was like, I need to move forward. And now I've come kind of full circle to say, actually, it's a big part of my background and my experience, and it's valuable, and I'm actually going to use it, and I'm okay to talk about it because I feel grounded in where I am right now.
It's probably one of your pillars.
It is, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I think what I was reflecting on as we were talking is it's interesting because I feel like I've done a lot of what she talked about. Like I kind of know what my core values are because I did that exercise about 10 years ago. And subsequently, I've gotten the 360 feedback. I've worked with a coach. But I think what I haven't done through my career as I reflect on it is been that disciplined on like really thinking about it, taking the time, providing the space, having those more intentional conversations with those truth tellers and the family and the friends to say like, how do you see me? And to actually go through that introspective exercise. And I feel like now where I am in my career, it's something I really reflect on is to say like, where do I want to be, in the next 10 years of my career? Or how do I take where I am today and be intentional with where I go? And I think this notion of personal branding and being out there is really important. And she said something to me that really resonated, probably kind of subsequent to the personal branding thing, is this feeling of like not being able to be on LinkedIn or social. It is not a comfortable space for me. Like I will opine over, what should I say? Did I say it right? Should I post it? Is my comment good? Should I like it? Should I love it? Like I sit there and I think about those things over and over. And then I see these people posting every day, these really insightful things, and I think to myself, how do they do that? And now I've just tried to start practicing a little bit as I go. Yeah. And she's totally right. It is something that you can get comfortable with if you know what you're good at posting and what you're not, but it's not something that I think would come naturally to me very well.
Yeah, I mean, my big aha was this idea of just, you are a brand. And if I think of any other brand that I've ever worked on or would ever manage, you have to be thoughtful about what does your brand stand for, and you have to actively behave in that way and say the things that you stand for and don't say the things that you don't stand for, and check in with your customers, or in this case, your friends, your followers, whatever. And she just simplified it for me of like, well, just treat it as you would any brand that you're working on. Well, of course I would. And so it's funny that people don't think about it that way. I didn't. But why wouldn't you? And why wouldn't you be thoughtful and planned in the way that you present yourself to the world? I think oddly enough, young people, I think of my daughter and the way that she kind of manages her Instagram feed. Boy, she's very particular about her brand.
You're right.
What she puts out there. And I think in this day and age, when everything is saved forever, we have, young people in particular are thinking about, okay, well, what do I post? What do I not post? How do I look? They're thinking about their brand. And so how do we think about that ourselves? And if it's not on Instagram, what are we putting out on LinkedIn professionally? I just like the idea of being thoughtful about it and
I love
intentional.
That. What brand is more important than your own?
Right.
So I think for the people listening and for wherever you are in your career, I think that step by step that Lisa provided, and obviously there's lots of resources on, the web, books, et cetera. But I think the reality is that each of us, wherever we are in our career, it's never the wrong time to either build it or check in on it and make sure that it's still reconciling. But I thought that was a really practical conversation on how each of us can be really disciplined with our brand.
For sure. And we'll link her book, which is going to be coming out soon. So we'll attach that in the show notes as well. All right.
Great.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to this episode of She Means Business. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and head over to our show notes where you can find helpful links and summaries of key points from the episode. We'd also love to hear from you on LinkedIn or Instagram, so please follow and DM us at the She Means Business podcast. See you next time.